He wasn't supposed to be there that morning. But fate, or something greater, put him exactly where he was needed. And because of that, dozens of kids are alive today. When I think back to that day, the memory still feels unreal, like a story someone else lived through. But it was ours. And it began with my father waking up earlier than usual, tying the same worn shoes he had worn for years, and heading to the school long before the sun climbed over the town. He was the janitor, humble, quiet, and never the type to stand in the spotlight. Most people only saw him sweeping halls and fixing stuck windows, but I knew the truth. My father loved that school. He cared for every child like they were his own. He knew their names, their favorite snacks, and which ones needed a little extra encouragement to feel brave. That morning was supposed to be simple. He went in early because the power had gone out the night before, and he wanted the building warm before the kids arrived. He wanted their day to start right. While he was walking his usual rounds, checking the doors and humming a tune from the radio, he noticed a side entrance cracked open. It wasn't supposed to be. Something felt wrong. He told me later, just before he closed his eyes for the last time, that instincts can whisper louder than words. And his instincts screamed at him that someone dangerous had entered the school. Within seconds, fear spread through the halls. Teachers locked classrooms. Children were rushed into corners. The silence was broken only by hurried footsteps and the distant sound of panic. And in the middle of it all, my father stood alone in that hallway, not running, not hiding, but thinking only about the kids he had watched grow up. Instead of backing away, he used the keys he carried on his belt to lock the long corridor that led toward the classrooms. His hands shook, but he kept going. He called out to a group of students who were frozen by fear and led them toward a storage room where they could stay out of sight. Some of the children were crying, some couldn't speak, but he kept reassuring them, telling them they would be okay, telling them he was right there. He stayed in the hallway after getting them to safety. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have armor. He only had a heart that refused to let harm reach the children he loved so deeply. When the danger moved closer, he stepped in its way. He shouted, drew attention to himself, and gave the teachers behind those doors precious moments to hide more kids. And that's when his story changed forever. By the time help arrived, the school was shaken, but so many lives had been saved because of a man who never asked to be a hero. The news later called him the brave custodian. But to me, he was simply Dad. A man who lived quietly, and died protecting the place he loved. And we will never forget him. My father wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a firefighter or a police officer. He was the school janitor, the man who swept floors, fixed broken lockers, and smiled at every student like they were his own. He was humble, quiet, the type of man people overlooked, until the day everything changed. When I talk about him now, people always imagine someone loud or commanding, someone who looked like a hero from the beginning. But my father was nothing like that. He blended into the background with the same calm presence every single day. He wore the same faded work shirt with his name stitched above the pocket, carried the same ring of keys that jingled as he walked, and used the same gentle voice whether he was comforting a scared child or reminding a teenager to throw away their lunch tray. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing that demanded attention, and I think that's what made him so special. He never tried to be anything but kind. Most mornings, he left home before the sky even began to lighten, whispering a soft goodbye so he wouldn't wake anyone. I used to pretend I didn't hear him, but I always did. I'd listen to the front door close and wonder how someone could care so deeply about a place that wasn't even his home. He would tell me, "A clean school makes for a clear mind." But as I got older, I realized it wasn't about the floors or the windows. It was about the kids. He believed every child deserved to feel safe, welcomed, and noticed. And he tried, every single day, to give them that. The students loved him in a way adults rarely do. They'd run up to him with broken shoelaces, bent lunchboxes, torn backpacks, and he'd fix whatever he could. Sometimes he didn't even fix anything, he just listened. There was something about his presence that made people feel safe. Even teachers would come to him when they were overwhelmed. They teased him and called him the heart of the school, but he never accepted that title. He said he was just doing his job. But anyone who watched him closely knew he was doing so much more. He remembered every child's name. Not almost all, every single one. He remembered who loved soccer, who was scared of thunderstorms, who hated math but loved drawing, who came to school hungry, and who tried to hide their sadness behind silly jokes. He saw them in a way adults often forget to. And he carried their stories with him quietly, gently, as if they were his responsibility to protect. Even outside of school, he lived the same way. When we went to the grocery store, he'd end up talking to someone in the aisle, helping them reach a tall shelf or offering an encouraging word. He wasn't the kind of man who filled a room with noise, but he filled it with warmth. People just felt better when he was around. I think that's why so many never really noticed how much work he was doing. He didn't brag. He didn't complain. He didn't ask for anything in return. He moved through life with a softness that made everything seem a little less heavy. The thing about people like my father is that you don't realize how important they are until suddenly, everything depends on them. You assume they'll always be there, holding things together in small invisible ways, until the day the world shakes, and they're the only one who stands firm. That's what happened at the school. The man everyone thought was just the janitor, became the one person who refused to let fear win. But long before that moment, long before anyone called him a hero, he was simply a good man doing his best in a quiet, consistent way. And maybe that's the part people forget when they hear the story now. They talk about his bravery, his sacrifice, the way he saved so many lives. But to me, the real story didn't start in that hallway. It started years before, in the small choices he made every day, choosing kindness when no one was watching, choosing patience when he was tired, choosing to care even when it wasn't in his job description. That was the man my father was. He never saw himself as extraordinary. He never imagined his name would end up in news headlines. He lived a simple life, yet somehow, that simple life became the reason dozens of children are alive today. And the world finally saw the man I had always known. Growing up, I never fully understood why he loved that school so much. He'd wake up before dawn, pack his old lunchbox, and tell me, "A clean place makes people feel safe." At the time, those words didn't mean much to me. I thought he just liked routine, or maybe he enjoyed staying busy. But the older I became, the more I realized he wasn't just talking about sweeping floors or wiping windows. He was talking about the feeling a place gives you. He believed that when a space is cared for, people inside it feel cared for too. And that was his quiet mission every single day. To him, the kids were more than students. They were part of his world, a world he protected in ways I never imagined. He never said it directly, but you could see it in the way he walked the halls, checking every corner as if he were guarding something precious. You could see it in the way he noticed the smallest changes, the kid who suddenly seemed too tired, the girl who started sitting alone at lunch, the boy whose jokes had turned from joyful to forced. He saw everything, not because he was nosy, but because he paid attention with his heart, not just his eyes. When I was younger, I didn't understand why he didn't want a different job, something people respected more, something with a uniform or a title people admired. I'd hear adults talk about what they did, doctors, engineers, officers, and then they'd look at my father and say, "Oh, you're the janitor," with that tone people use when they think a job is small. But he never reacted to that. He'd smile, nod politely, and move on with his day like their opinions didn't matter at all. And maybe they didn't. Because he knew something they didn't, his work had meaning. I remember sitting with him at the kitchen table one night while he packed his lunch for the next morning. He folded his sandwich into a napkin, placed an apple beside it, and then paused with his hands resting on the counter. Without even looking at me, he said quietly, "You know, most people don't get to see the difference they make. But I do. Every day." At the time, I didn't know what he meant. But later, I realized he wasn't talking about the difference a mop or broom made. He was talking about the difference he made simply by being present, steady, gentle, reliable. He'd tell me stories sometimes. Not big, dramatic stories, but little ones. Like the boy who used to cry in the bathroom before class because he was scared to read out loud. My father started waiting in the hallway near the bathroom, whistling softly, just so the boy wouldn't feel alone. Or the girl whose backpack zipper kept breaking because her family didn't have much money. My father fixed it 3 times until he finally bought her a new one with his own paycheck. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't need credit. He just did what felt right. When you grow up watching someone care that deeply, something changes in you. You begin to see the world the way they see it. You begin to understand that love doesn't always shout, sometimes it whispers. It whispers in early mornings, in tired hands, in small acts that nobody applauds. It whispers in the way a man wakes up every day to protect a place that isn't just a building to him, it's a living part of his heart. As I got older, I noticed how much the school shaped him, but I also noticed how much he shaped the school. Without him, the hallways felt different. Teachers looked more stressed. Kids were a little less calm. But when he was there, everything seemed to breathe easier. He was like a quiet anchor holding the entire place steady, and none of us realized it until later. He always said the school was like a second home. But I think, deep down, it was more than that. It was a family he chose. A family he felt responsible for. A family he would eventually risk everything to protect. And I didn't understand the depth of that connection, not until the day everything changed. That morning started like any other. Coffee, keys jingling at his belt, a quiet building waking up to another school day. I remember watching him tie his shoes before he left, the same worn pair he had used for years. He smiled the way he always did, calm and steady, the kind of smile that told you the day would be fine no matter what came. He grabbed his lunchbox, the old metal one he refused to replace, and stepped out into the cool air before the sun had fully risen. Nothing about that morning felt unusual. Nothing warned us about what was coming. It was just another day, or at least it was supposed to be. He got to the school before most of the staff, like he always did. He liked the stillness of the early hours, when the hallways were empty and the only sounds were his footsteps and the soft hum of the heating system turning on. He brewed a pot of coffee in the break room for the teachers, checked the lights, and walked his usual route through the building. It was a routine he knew by heart, almost like a quiet ritual he performed to prepare the place for the hundreds of children who would soon fill it with laughter and noise. The school felt peaceful, almost gentle, and he moved through it with the confidence of someone who knew every corner. But then, everything shifted. It started with something small. He noticed a breeze coming from the side of the building. A door that was usually shut tight wasn't fully closed. He paused, frowning, because he knew that door better than anyone. He knew how it latched, how it stuck sometimes, how it creaked if someone opened it too quickly. And now it sat slightly open, just enough to let in the morning air. Something in his chest tightened. He wasn't a man who panicked easily, but he trusted his instincts, and his instincts were telling him something was wrong. What happened next rippled through the hallways like a sudden storm. A stranger had entered the school. No one knew who they were or why they were there, but fear spread faster than anyone could react. Teachers shouted for students to get inside their classrooms. Feet pounded against the floors as kids ran, some crying, some frozen, unsure of what to do. The alarms blared, sharp and unsettling, echoing through every corner of the building. Doors slammed shut. Lights flickered. Voices rose in confusion and fear. The peaceful morning shattered in an instant. And my father didn't run. While everyone else hurried toward safety, he was walking toward the danger. Not because he thought he was invincible, not because he wanted to be a hero, but because he couldn't bear the thought of something happening to the children he cared for so deeply. His job might have been to clean and repair, but his heart had always been tied to the people inside those walls. And in that moment, when fear tried to swallow the building whole, he chose to stand his ground. He stepped into the hallway, scanning for students who were too scared or confused to move. He called out to them with the same gentle voice he used every day, telling them to come to him, guiding them with calm instructions even as chaos echoed around him. He led a small group toward a safe area, checking behind him every few seconds to make sure no one had been left behind. His hands shook, not from fear for himself but from worry for them. He locked a hallway door, using that familiar ring of keys that always jingled at his side, and tried to create a barrier between the danger and the classrooms behind him. People always talk about heroes like they are larger than life, like they wear capes or stand tall without hesitation. But my father wasn't like that. He was an ordinary man with calloused hands and a tired back, someone who spent more time fixing broken desks than facing emergencies. And yet, in the moment when it mattered most, he became the one everyone depended on. That day began with coffee and keys and the quiet hum of a school waking up. But it turned into a test of courage, a moment that revealed who he truly was beneath the quiet exterior. And as alarms echoed and fear spread, he did the one thing his heart wouldn't let him avoid. He stepped forward, instead of running away. He guided the nearest group of students into an empty classroom, locked the doors behind them, and calmed crying kids with nothing more than his voice. I can picture it even though I wasn't there, the way he probably knelt down to their eye level, the way he would have offered a steady smile even while fear pressed against his own chest. He wasn't the kind of man who raised his voice or made big dramatic gestures. His strength came from gentleness, from the kind of calm that could quiet storms. And in that moment, those children needed exactly that. He told them to stay low, stay quiet, and stay together. A few of the younger ones clung to his sleeve, begging him not to leave, but he kept reassuring them that everything would be all right. If there was any fear in his eyes, he hid it well. Not because he wanted to seem brave, but because he knew they needed someone to believe in. And he wanted them to believe in safety, even when the world outside the classroom felt anything but safe. Then he saw more students trapped at the end of the hallway. A small cluster of kids frozen in confusion, unsure which way to run. And instead of hiding, he went toward them. That single choice still echoes through my mind. He could have stayed in the locked classroom, surrounded by children who already trusted him. He could have waited for help to arrive. But that wasn't who he was. Responsibility was something he carried naturally, like breathing. The moment he saw those kids alone, something inside him knew exactly what he had to do. I wasn't there. I didn't see his steps, his gestures, or the moment he decided to move toward danger instead of away from it. But the witnesses all said the same thing. Some were teachers who saw him through a narrow window. Some were students who caught only a glimpse before being rushed into safety. Others were staff members who later tried to explain how someone so soft-spoken found the strength to do what he did. Their voices cracked the same way every time they repeated their memories. He put himself between danger and the children. Those words come back to me over and over again, not because they surprise me, but because they confirm what I already knew deep in my heart. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think of himself first. He didn't calculate risks or odds or possibilities. His instinct was simple: protect the kids. And that instinct became the reason so many families got to hug their children again at the end of that terrifying day. Another witness said, he refused to leave until every kid was safe. When I heard that, something inside me broke a little. Because that was him. That was the man I grew up with. The man who stayed late to fix a broken desk because he didn't want a child to sit at something wobbly. The man who drove across town to return a lost backpack because he knew its owner would worry. The man who couldn't walk past sadness without trying to comfort it. It made perfect sense that he stayed in that hallway until every child he could help was out of danger. When I imagine the scene, I see him moving slowly, deliberately, trying not to startle the terrified children at the far end of the corridor. I see him gently ushering them forward, whispering instructions, keeping his steps light and controlled. Maybe he held one child's hand. Maybe he encouraged another who couldn't stop shaking. Maybe his own hands trembled, but his voice stayed steady enough for them to trust. And all the while, the building around him buzzed with fear, alarms echoing, doors slamming, hurried whispers from classrooms where teachers tried to keep their students calm. The world was shaking, but he refused to let his heart shake with it. He stayed focused on the only thing that mattered, getting those children to safety. There's a point in every story where a character reveals who they truly are. A moment that strips away titles, expectations, and assumptions. That was his moment. Not because the world saw him as a hero, but because he acted from a place of pure love, without thinking twice. People say bravery is loud, bold, and fearless. But his bravery was quiet. It came wrapped in soft words, steady hands, and a heart willing to stand in the space where danger met innocence. And it was that quiet courage, that unwavering instinct to protect, that changed everything. He never made it out. Those 5 words still feel unreal, like they belong in someone else's life and not in mine. The second shot echoed through the corridor, sharp enough that even people outside the building felt something was terribly wrong. Teachers later said the sound rattled their bones, that it seemed to shake the entire school for a moment. But inside that hallway, he stood alone, doing what he always did, putting others first. By the time help arrived, it was too late. The world moved quickly after that, rushing in with flashing lights, frantic voices, and a wave of relief and sorrow mixed together in a way that made no sense. They cleared the halls, gathered the students, and tried to restore calm, but there was no undoing what had already happened. He had made his choice long before anyone else had the chance to step in. The news called him the brave custodian. I remember seeing those words everywhere, on television screens, printed on headlines, repeated by anchors who spoke with practiced sympathy. They talked about his courage, about the number of students he had guided to safety, about how his actions slowed the danger long enough for others to lock doors and protect their classrooms. They listed the facts like they were reading from a script, and maybe they were. But behind each word, I felt the weight of a life that was so much more than a brief description. Social media called him a hero. People who had never met him posted about him, shared photos of the school, wrote messages about bravery and sacrifice. Some of them meant it. Others just followed the moment. But every time I saw his name trending or watched strangers speak about him with admiration, something inside me tightened. Because as grateful as I was that people recognized what he did, I also knew that none of them truly understood who he was before that day. They knew his last moments, but they didn't know the lifetime that shaped them. Reporters said his courage saved an entire wing of the school. They spoke with certainty, quoting officials, interviewing teachers, piecing together timelines to tell the story as clearly as they could. I listened to them recount details I wasn't ready to hear, and yet I couldn't stop myself from watching. Maybe part of me wanted proof that the world saw him the way I did. Maybe part of me wanted confirmation that his life mattered, that his quiet ways had meaning, that the man so many overlooked had become the one nobody could ignore. But to me, he wasn't a headline. He wasn't a story. He wasn't a symbol or a moment of inspiration for broadcasts and articles. He wasn't someone to be summarized in a sentence or celebrated for a single act. He was Dad. The man who worked quietly, loved deeply, and sacrificed everything without hesitation. I think about the small things first, the way he used to hum while making breakfast, the way he laughed when he tried to fix something at home and accidentally broke it worse, the way he'd place his hand gently on my shoulder when he could tell I was overwhelmed. Those memories rise before anything else, even before the fear and shock of that day. It's strange how the mind works, how it holds on to the softness of someone long after the world has wrapped them in a label like hero. He never lived for praise. He didn't try to be anything extraordinary. His life was made of simple acts, helping a student find a lost book, making sure the hallways were warm on cold mornings, reminding teachers to take breaks when they were exhausted. None of those things ever made the news. They never would. But they were the pieces of him that built the foundation for the courage people talk about now. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine the hallway where he stood. I picture him taking a deep breath, steadying himself, knowing exactly what he needed to do. Not because he wanted honor, but because protecting others was simply who he was. And maybe that's the part people will never fully understand. He didn't become a hero in a single moment. He lived like one long before anyone noticed. He never made it out. But the lives he saved, the hearts he touched, and the love he carried with him, those things did. And they always will. It's been years, but his absence still feels loud. That's something people don't talk about, the way silence can echo, the way a missing voice can fill every corner of your memory. Sometimes I walk the hallways he used to clean, and even though the floors shine and the lockers look new, I can still imagine him there, pushing his cart, humming that soft melody he always hummed when he thought no one was listening. The school has changed since that day, but in the places he touched, in the routines he built, I still feel him. Teachers still talk about him, not in a forced or rehearsed way, but with genuine warmth. They mention him like you'd mention an old friend who shaped the early part of your life. Some of them tell stories I hadn't heard before, little things he did that seemed small at the time but now feel enormous. One teacher told me he used to stop by her classroom every morning just to ask how she was feeling because he noticed she always looked tired on Wednesdays. Another said he used to leave spare pencils in the hallway because students often forgot theirs before math tests. These tiny acts, scattered across years, built a legacy no headline could ever fully explain. Students who survived that day still leave notes at his memorial plaque. Some are short, just a thank you or a heart drawn in blue pen. Others are longer, written by young adults who were children back then and now understand what he did for them. They write about the families they grew up with, the jobs they're working, the dreams they're chasing, and how they know none of it would have been possible without the courage he showed. Sometimes I stand there reading those notes, feeling a mix of grief and gratitude so strong it almost knocks the air from my chest. It hurts to know he isn't here to see the lives he protected flourish. But it also reminds me that his story didn't end in that hallway. It continues through every person who got to grow up because of him. Everyone remembers the hero he became. They remember the bravery, the sacrifice, the moment he put his life on the line to save others. And I'm glad they do. I'm glad people speak his name with respect, that they understand even a fraction of who he was. But I remember something different. I remember the man who hummed while mopping, who brought home leftover cafeteria cookies because he thought I might want a treat after a long day. I remember the man who took his time with everything, not because he was slow, but because he believed every task deserved care. I remember the way he softened when he talked to kids, the way he brightened when a student waved at him from across the hall, the way he always seemed to have time for anyone who needed it. He believed kindness was the strongest form of bravery. He said it once without realizing how deeply the words would stick with me. Anyone can raise their voice, he told me. But not everyone can raise someone's spirit. At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. But now, looking back on his life, I see how consistently he lived by that idea. His bravery wasn't loud or showy or dramatic. It was built in daily choices, staying calm when others panicked, being patient when others rushed, offering help before being asked. The courage he showed in his final moments was just an extension of the courage he had shown his entire life. Sometimes I visit the school early in the morning, before the students arrive, when the hallways are quiet. I walk past the classrooms he once protected, past the corners where he used to stop and chat, past the doors he locked during the worst moment of his life. And every time, I feel that strange mix of sorrow and pride. I mourn what I lost, but I'm proud of what he gave. Years have passed, but the truth remains simple: he didn't become a hero that day. He had always been one. The world only noticed when his kindness met a moment that demanded courage. And though I miss him more than words can hold, I carry his lessons with me, his gentleness, his patience, his belief that kindness, even the smallest kind, can change everything. He's gone, but his love is still here. And in the quiet moments, I can still hear him humming. His keys hang on my wall now, rusty, old, still connected by the same worn-out ring he carried every day. They clink together softly whenever the window is open, like a quiet echo of the steps he used to take down those school hallways. I didn't polish them or shine them or try to make them look new. I kept them exactly as they were, with scratches from years of use, with bits of paint still stuck to the edges, with the faint smell of metal and dust that reminds me of the storage rooms he used to organize with such care. People ask why I keep them, why I hold on to something so simple and ordinary. They think I should keep a photo, or his old shirt, or something more sentimental. But the answer is simple: because they aren't just keys. They're a symbol. They represent everything about who he was, everything he stood for, everything he gave. Most people see keys as tools, objects that open doors, lock rooms, start cars, or close things away. But his keys opened more than just the school's classrooms. They opened a world of safety for hundreds of children. They locked away fear when he secured those hallways. They created moments of peace every morning when he walked through the building, making sure everything worked the way it should. Those keys tell a story louder than words ever could. They remind me that real heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes, they wear work boots and carry cleaning supplies. Sometimes they walk quietly, unnoticed, through the background of other people's lives. And sometimes, they give their lives protecting children they didn't even know. When I look at those keys hanging on the wall, I don't see metal. I see mornings where he woke up before dawn, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, grabbing his coffee and whispering goodbye as he left. I see afternoons where he came home tired but still managed to ask about my day, still managed to listen even when exhaustion pulled at his shoulders. I see evenings where he sat at the kitchen table fixing something, gluing the strap of a student's backpack back together, tightening the screws on a broken toy someone gave him to repair, testing a flashlight he found in the lost and found box because some kid might need it later. Those keys are tied to all those moments, to the small acts of kindness that defined his life far more than the final act the world remembers. People always talk about bravery like it's something huge, something loud and dramatic. But my father showed me a different kind of bravery, a quieter kind. The bravery of showing up every day for people who might never say thank you. The bravery of doing what's right even when no one notices. The bravery of caring deeply in a world that sometimes values convenience over compassion. He didn't fight battles with weapons. He fought them with patience, with gentleness, with the determination to make a place feel safe for anyone who walked through its doors. That was his strength. That was his legacy. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I take the keys in my hand and close my eyes. The metal is cool, the jingling soft, and for a moment I can almost feel him standing beside me. I imagine him smiling in that quiet way he did, the kind of smile that didn't need words to carry meaning. I imagine him saying everything he believed, that ordinary people matter, that kindness matters, that every small choice adds up to something bigger than we realize. And each time I hold those keys, I'm reminded that he didn't just protect a school one tragic morning. He protected it every day long before that. One moment didn't define him, a lifetime did. If this story touched your heart, leave a tribute for him in the comments. I find myself wanting to say those words, not because I need praise for him, but because I want people to remember men like him, quiet, steady, unnoticed by many but needed by everyone. And if you know someone quiet and ordinary who deserves to be remembered, tell their story. Too many people like him go through life unheard, unseen, their goodness hidden behind titles or uniforms that don't reflect their worth. But their stories matter. Their kindness matters. Sometimes the world pays attention only when something dramatic happens, but the truth is, heroes walk among us every day unnoticed. Heroes aren't defined by power. Heroes are defined by love. I've learned that heroism lives in the small things, the gentle voices, soft hands, steady steps. It lives in people who don't ask for recognition, who don't chase after praise, who simply choose to care because it's who they are. My father was one of those people. He lived his entire life in the quiet spaces most people overlook. And yet, when the world needed him most, he stood exactly where he was meant to be. Not because he wanted glory. Not because he saw himself as brave. But because the children mattered to him, because protecting people mattered to him, because love guided him more strongly than fear ever could. When I walk past the wall where his keys hang, sometimes I stop without meaning to. Sometimes I touch them gently, just to remind myself that he was real, not a headline, not a story passed around by strangers, not a figure frozen in a moment of tragedy. He was a man who hummed while mopping, who brought home leftover cafeteria cookies, who believed in kindness the way some people believe in sunlight. And those are the memories I hold closest. Those are the memories that shape who I am now. And yet, what happened years later changed everything I thought I knew about that day. It shifted pieces of the story I believed were permanent. It opened a door to a truth I wasn't ready to face. But that's a story for another time. For now, all I can do is honor the man behind the keys, the man whose quiet life became a lesson for the world, and whose love continues to echo in the hearts he protected.